would it be possible that taxi drivers who spent at least 8 hours and probably more per day finding their way around a very complex environment would actually, through time, change the structure of their brain?
Older adults are demanding more and more of themselves. So this incredible demand that we're seeing from the older population in maintaining their cognitive abilities places a burden on science to understand what we can do to maintain these critical and fine-tuned cognitive abilities. We're beginning to understand that the ability to maintain these processes is dependent upon how much you're using them.
The function of the visual system is to extract information from the environment using the pattern of light that falls on the retina. And people often ask about the fact that vision is piecemeal and it uses tricks. All of those observations are a reflection of the fact that the whole function of the visual system is to extract information.
Our brain is an extraordinarily powerful filter and integrator of all the information that we get through the outside world.
Every moment of our lives, we make decisions based on information derived from our senses. This information gives us the cues that we need to survive and thrive. But what if we could do something to dramatically impact these abilities? What if we harnessed the tools of neuroplasticity that we have at our disposal? What if the brain ultimately holds the key to our independence? Join me as we explore the possibilities and future of brain fitness, sight and sound. The transformative power of the brain is predicated on the principles of neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change and adapt as we age.
I once had a stand-up fight with a very eminent neuroscientist in public about plasticity, because his definition of plasticity was just that thing of growing little new synapses, little new connections between nerve cells. And my definition of plasticity is much wider. It's any change in brain functional structure that results from interaction with the environment. And that can include mechanisms that are structural, like new synapses, new nerve cells, strengthening of synapses. But essentially, to my mind, it's best defined as something very general that gives you an input into this idea of the brain being a very dynamic piece of machinery, quite unlike any machine that we know, which is able to respond in a very dynamic way to the environment and express itself through our bodies.
Within our head, we have the capacity in our brain to change it. We have the capacity to improve it. We have the capacity to strengthen and refine it in vision, in our operations, and then we have the capacity to improve it as listeners so that our listening can be refined. And the cumulative consequence of all of this is a substantially greater potential to have a richer, sustained, safer, and more likely independent older life.
Having a clear view of our world is largely dependent on our ability to get good information from our senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, and vision. It's simple to think about seeing and hearing as a function of just the eyes and ears, but those sense organs are a mere fraction of the whole story.
The eye really is shaped like a ball. It's truly an eyeball, and what you can see is sort of the front of that ball. The colored part that you see is called the iris. The black part is the pupil. That actually isn't a thing, it's just a hole in the middle of the muscle. Between the very surface of the eye and the iris is something called the anterior chamber, which is just fluid-filled. Behind the iris is a whole bunch more fluid called the vitreous fluid. And then at the very back of that is the retina. The retina is a layered structure which is set up so that the cells that you actually see with are in the front, but the light has to go all the way through to the back to change these pigment-containing cells, which then send a message to the cells in the front. That message then goes all the way back again through a sort of hole in the back of the eye called the optic disc. and all the fibers from those cells join together to form the optic nerve. The number of fibers and the number of cells that are dedicated to vision is extraordinary. If you just take your optic nerve, which really has all the information you use for vision in it, and dissect it out into all its individual fibers, there's about 1 million fibers in there.
Receptor cells in our sense organs encode information and relay it to the brain. These signals are refined in their transmission to the cortex. And there, the information is decoded for use in the control of action and thought.
And the cortex is really where I think the interesting part of the brain is. In the back, you have your occipital lobes, which is where your visual cortex is. And then wrapped like little arms are the temporal lobes. And that's usually where your auditory cortex is, where you experience hearing.
The higher parts of the brain associated with thinking, learning, and memory. Approximately half of that is actually devoted to processing what we see. Whenever there's any ambiguity in what we see relative to what we hear, or even what we smell or feel relative to what we see, we always go with vision. It's our dominant sense.
The point of it is that you see with the brain that's in the back of your head. So in sense, I guess you have eyes in the back of your head.
So once information from the eyes received by the back of the brain, the visual cortex, the information is split off into two components, the what and the where system. And in order to see a visual information or a visual scene, you need to know both where things are in space and whether they're moving, as well as identify what they are. And so there are two distinct processing streams in the brain that handle these things, but there are interconnections between them so that you can link them back up. So if you see a ball moving in space, you can both identify that it's a ball and where it is in space.
We have, in a sense, two visual systems. One of them is evolutionarily old. We share it with other mammals, and it doesn't see color. It really isn't sensitive to difference in color. It mostly sees the world in black and white. And this part of our visual system is important for navigating through the environment, spatial organization, depth, distance, motion, and then our object recognition system, the part of our visual system for seeing faces, for seeing color, for recognizing objects in much finer detail. That system is very sensitive to color.
The eye basically delivers information in a highly resolved form in the brain, in time and in place, and color. And we take in that information in the brain and we create, of course, the reconstructions of it in all of its complexity. So if you think of something like a painting that is full of complex color, we see all of the detail. We see all of the color in appropriate position in relation to the detail. Instead of a painting, a complex moving scene, we have an amazing ability to see many aspects of that, of what's there and how it's moving in relation to another. We have all of this beautiful ability to take in this information and make our world out of it.
We're interested in contrast because that's where everything is happening. Local contrast, spatial as well as temporal contrast. We're interested when something appears that wasn't there. We're interested if there's a discontinuity in the image. And we do it by lateral inhibition, a simple circuit where you have one cell and a next cell, and this one inhibits that cell. The visual system, the brain in general, is a binary computer. Cells either fire or not. They're either excited or not, and inhibition can cancel excitation. And so you've got these very simple little elements to work with. And that's what's fun about neurobiology and physiology in general, is figuring out how you can get these complex response patterns from these really simple circuit elements.
And when you think about the task for the visual system, you immediately are led to the view that if the visual system didn't change throughout our lifetime, it really wouldn't work very well. The yellowing of the lens increases as we get older. Less and less short wavelength or blue light reaches the back of the eye. If we weren't able to readjust our vision for those changes, then what would be called white by, say, somebody aged 35 would be distinctly yellow for a 70-year-old. This is a form of neuroplasticity.
The function of the visual system is to extract information from the environment using the pattern of light that falls on the retina. Visually, you've got two flat retinal images. how do you take two flat retinal images and extract all this information about distance and depth? Well, your visual system uses things like perspective, the fact that things that are farther away subtend smaller angles on your retina. That's geometry, but your visual system uses that to tell you something about distance. Relative motion, so things that are, when you move your head back and forth, things that are nearer move more than things that are farther away. And stereopsis, which is the fact that you've got two eyes, they're separated by a few inches, so they see the world from slightly different angles. And your visual system uses the difference in those two images to calculate distance and depth. So you could call those tricks, but they're ways that your visual system uses to calculate information about the world.
How do we know that the main purpose of the visual system is to extract information? One major clue is the blind spot.
The blind spots are the parts of the retina where the optic nerve leaves the eyeball, and so there are no photoreceptors right there.
If I close one eye, I can put my finger in a place where I can't see my finger, and then I can see it again, and I can't see it, I can see it, I can't see it, I can see it, I can't see it, I can see it again.
You don't notice it because nothing is happening there. And your visual system is all about extracting information, and it doesn't care about places where nothing is happening.
The fidelity of the signal the brain receives depends on the sampling rate of the brain.
Imagine I see a really interesting face in front of me, and I'm trying to reconstruct it in all of the details that will help me remember it forever. You can think of them as taking a series of little quick snapshots, flash, 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 around the face. And that greatly strengthens the reliability with which they can remember, the accuracy with which they can remember. Let's say that you could look at a single picture. There's a lot more information, and the relationships of one thing to another from 6 snapshots than from one. So you're advantaged if you can do things in your operations in vision that basically liven up your eyes and make you a bright-eyed individual again. And that's literally what you see in a young person. You see their eyes sparkle, and they're sparkling because they're moving, and you want your eyes to move again.
The brain is constantly generating successive, high-resolution views of the world through rapid movements of the eyes called saccades. Each saccade provides the brain with a series of rapid-fire snapshots of the scene.
If I'm looking at one person and decide that I'm going to look across the room at somebody else, I fixate on the first person, perceive information from them, then execute an attentional shift and a saccadic movement to a different person or a different object. So if I were to hold my 2 fingers, for example, and I ask you to look at my right finger, and then like you can look at my left finger, the saccade is the movement between them.
Your eyes move around a lot. So most of us think that we're looking out on the world, and the world is stable, and our impression of the world is stable, but you're actually moving your eyes around constantly.
Sampling rate, or how quickly one processes information within a given eye movement, has an analogous expression with hearing.
In listening, the brain itself is controlling the rate at which it samples. Basically, it has to, because there's no equivalent to active vision. Vision is much more positively active in that sense than listening. Of course, when we listen, it's important that we be on the ball, alert, tuned in. These sounds in listening of speech of someone talking to you flow by, amazingly rapidly changing, and the more accurately you can reconstruct them in detail, the better you'll understand what people say and the better you'll remember it.
So what is the brain looking for? How is it extracting information from the environment? Optical illusions can help us understand.
Many people are interested in illusions because of the gee whiz appeal. But scientists are interested in illusions because they're really kind of probes to tell us what the visual system is trying to accomplish.
There's a phenomenon which is called change blindness. You can show a picture that flashes, and you can change something very major in this picture, so that every alternate picture is missing that component. And you can say to people, please look at this. There is something different between alternate pictures, and they don't see it. They simply cannot pick it up, even though they are attending, until about 40 seconds passes, and then suddenly they notice it. There's a very famous one of Marines walking into an aircraft where on alternate pictures, the aircraft doesn't have an engine. And what you find is that if you change the environment without the percept changing, the brain notices it. So all the areas of the brain, the visual areas that you would expect, come up, bing. Yet your percept hasn't changed. And then if you now don't change the environment, but the percept changes, compare those two, what you see is that those areas in the brain, in the visual system that had come up when you hadn't noticed it, come up even more. So they're amplified, if you like. And then there are two areas in the right part of the brain, here in the frontal lobe and here in the parietal lobe, that suddenly become very manifest. They suddenly become very active. And those areas of the brain are the areas of the brain that neurologists associate with attention.
You're interested in things that change. And so in order to be able to look in more detail at objects, primates started moving their eyes around a lot. So I noticed the other day, if you go look at a Mark Rothko painting, it tends to have very soft edges and big fields of homogeneous color. You get whiteout when you look at a Rothko painting, or a blackout. That's because there's no edges for your microsaccades to cause vision. So things fade and you don't see anything. And I think that's one of the reasons why Rothko paintings are so creepy, is because you often get a little blind when you look at them, which feels somehow mystical.
Understanding how all of these pieces add up in the brain is the domain of scientists with the latest brain scanning technology. Even before neuroscientists studied the visual system phenomenon, another group performed illuminating experiments: artists.
I'm a visual physiologist, and I try to figure out how the brain works by studying visual processing. But artists also try to study visual processing, because when they make a work of art, you don't know how it's going to come out until you look at it, right? And so artists have figured out that very funny things happen when you can have color contrast, which we see quite well, but no luminance contrast.
One famous portrait that shows the power of active vision is the portrait of Lisa Gherardini, wife of Francesco del Giocondo, Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, the Mona Lisa.
Your center of gaze is very high resolution. It's very good at seeing small, detailed things. That's why you move your eyes when you read. Your peripheral vision is much lower resolution. But you don't have this impression that the whole world is kind of high resolution here and very blurry here, but that's because you move your eyes around all the time. The Mona Lisa's expression. As you look at this image, sometimes she's smiling and sometimes she's not. And it's actually quite uncanny. If you're looking at her eyes, she's smiling. You look at her mouth, she stops. Leonardo used sfumato, which is smoky, blurry, right? Therefore, her smile is ambiguous. And therefore, it's left up to your imagination or your state of mind. But no, it's not your state of mind, it's where you're looking. So if you filter the Mona Lisa so that you can see what she looks like to your center of gaze, which is in essence for the high spatial frequencies, the very fine details, she's not smiling at all. She's only smiling in the low, blurry spatial frequencies. And so your peripheral vision sees her smile, your central vision doesn't.
So how do we exert control over our visual system and its unusual method for extracting information from the environment? We turn to one of the major tenets of plasticity: attention. By focusing our attention, we can control the input that the visual system obtains.
Motion-induced blindness makes us realize how attention really influences what we see and what we don't see. There's a circle of moving blue dots and triangles sort of circumscribed by these 3 yellow dots. And if you focus in the middle of that triangle and let those dots swirl around, you'll start to notice that the yellow spots wink out. And it's not because they're not there, they are still there, but your brain doesn't perceive them because it's busy paying attention to the motion of the blue dots around it.
Another thing that comes out is that of all the things that are constantly impinging on our sense organs, so be it the skin, the smell, vision, hearing, and so on, Imagine every single one of those millions of receptors are constantly being bombarded by signals, but we're not aware of them. And indeed, we only become aware of things when we pay attention to them or concentrate on them.
Our plasticity in how we perceive the world, our visual experience in our environment, exists at many levels. So it exists at the level of perception and our ability to identify or detect things around us. But it also exists in terms of our attention and our memory of our visual world. So one thing we're trying to do now is understand how the different aspects of plasticity and all these different levels, perception, attention, and memory, all come together. And at what level we can have the most impact to really help people's abilities.
As we age, our bodies and our brains slow, and we see and hear and feel less. The quality of the information that we receive from our senses deteriorates. Older brains are constantly struggling to reconstruct the details. Sharpened senses are one of the most important components to positive aging.
Our vision does decline. For instance, in vision, you need 20 times more light to see at night by age 40. To see as well as you did at age 20 on the road. So when next time you're driving down the highway at night, don't curse the highway department for not painting the lines. The lines are just fine. It's your vision that may be the problem. With hearing, for instance, do you know that research done by the folks who design digital hearing aids and on the cutting edge of acoustical technology know very well that most of us will go 10 years without a hearing aid, longer than we actually needed it. But in those 10 years, we've actually rewired our brain not to hear, or not to hear well. So it's not just about missing the conversation. We're actually starting to rewire how we think and how we hear and how we interact with the world.
Vision is particularly important because it basically constitutes the basis of our ongoing interpretation of the world. Of course, it's also extremely important that we be able to engage in the real world as accurate receivers of information from listening. So in their operations in fast time, an older brain, an older individual is very limited in the information they gather about the world. And of course they remember it more poorly. Of course they operate it with less fidelity, with less ability. Because it's not just seeing what's happening in the world, but it's responding to it. It's reacting to it, and react to it with our physical body.
We can see physical manifestations of time on our physical body, wrinkles, perhaps graying hair, but our sensory inputs age in a more subtle way.
With aging, that decline tends to be subtle. We cope. So for instance, without getting our glasses fixed over time, holding, as I do with my BlackBerry, further and further away, is a coping strategy that's actually changing how I relate to the technology, how I change to everything, and actually changing how I may actually perceive a lot of the world. If you don't take care of your hearing, slowly what you're doing is you're retraining both your social interaction with the world as well as your brain of how you interact with other people. Nodding when you didn't hear it in the first place, only picking up certain words, or not saying things when you should because you weren't quite sure you heard the intonation correctly.
And to the aging eye, these changes manifest in differences of color and light. Once again, artists proved to be a valuable study group. Impressionist Claude Monet spent almost his entire career painting outside, much to the detriment of his eyes.
All this time outdoors probably accelerated what happens in all of our eyes. Namely, by being outdoors, he got more than the usual cumulative dose of optical radiation, particularly ultraviolet light.
By the time Monet was 68 years old, he had difficulty seeing in bright light and painting objects with bright backgrounds. He was developing cataracts.
Following the cataract surgery, he now complained that everything seen through one eye with the remaining cataract appeared to yellow, and everything seen through the other eye with the cataract removed appeared to blue. And most people will tell you that following the cataract surgery, the world appears brighter and bluer. Over time, the visual system doesn't just adapt to it, as in the sense of tuning it out and ignoring it. The visual system actually recalibrates itself, so things appear differently.
And as the quality of sensory input to the brain declines, the power of predictive thinking, which served us well in our youth, can also send us down a dangerous path.
On the basis of its prediction, it's basically trying to, in a sense, help you, lead you down the path to the next predicted thing. Ultimately, even this powerful ability to abstract and predict can fail you. And it's really important that you improve the accuracy in which you take in information again and represent it in your brain, because that will help you sustain your ability to make accurate predictions.
Broadening that window of attention and increasing the speed at which we process information dramatically impacts our interaction with the world around us.
Finding things in the world, finding things on a shelf, even finding someone's name in a phone book, being able to use an ATM machine, being able to go on the phone and getting this menuing system. And all of these types of things are improved as you improve the speed of processing information.
There's some indications that the accuracy of the saccade changes as well. So when we move from one place to another, we overshoot that, and we have what's called corrective saccades, or small saccades, to transfer our attentional focus back where we want it. So we might be looking at a picture, an object, or a word, and an older adult is more likely than a younger adult to go back and look at that information again.
As the older you get, the more and more you're looking as if you have blinders on, the more and more difficult it is for you actually to identify and operate and respond to anything that's occurring away from the center of gaze or the center of your visual world.
Nowhere is this decline in processing more apparent than in our useful field of view. Useful field of view. It's a term that describes just how much interpretable information a person can absorb during one brief glance. As we age, the amount of information that we can gather from our useful field of view decreases.
Like many aspects of life, we're gradually contracting the world that we're dealing with and its complexities to simplify it by negative plasticity. One of the things that's happening is we're moving our eyes much less aggressively. On the basis of that, we're getting much less practice in our brain in making decisions about what's happening out here. We're becoming weaker and weaker at responding to things. All of these abilities are weakening basically because our operations of the dynamics of how we're sampling information in the world are slowly deteriorating.
As we age, we think the whole world has gotten quicker or everything's moving faster, and we tend to attribute it externally rather than what's going on within us.
Part of our useful field of view absorbs not only what we see directly in front of us, but what we observe in our peripheral vision, a critical component in the task of driving.
We know that as drivers are engaged in different cognitive tasks, they perceive the world differently. They limit off portions of their peripheral visual field. The useful field of view we know declines with age. The brain limits the amount of information flow through the eyes. And it does that by allowing me to focus on the primary area I'm interested in, but chopping off more of the areas in the peripheral visual field.
We live in a high-speed world, and it's really important that we see things in our peripheral vision and respond to them at high speed.
The peripheral visual field is where I detect motion, where I'm looking at objects that may become threats. If we look in those objects less, if we're perceiving the surrounding world less, there's obviously implications for safety.
Older drivers who have problems on the useful field of view test are more than twice as likely to be involved in an automobile accident in the next 5 years.
The contraction of the useful field of view impacts every aspect of mobility as we age.
If you can think back to when you were 16 and you got your driver's license, and the very first time you went out in the car by yourself and how free you felt, or maybe the first time in your life and that independence you felt. And we carry that with us, regardless if we remember that or not. And often when an older person is faced with the possibility of having to not drive, we're taking away that freedom, that independence.
Useful field of view is not just about mobility and independence. Maintaining it is also critical to remaining connected to the world.
Like quickly interpreting the social scene in front of you so that you're socially adept and don't become a social fossil. It's about quickly interpreting the things in your medicine cabinet so that you know what goes with what on the basis of critical information that's coming to you from your vision and reconstructing those things and their relationships. It's in a million things that require active vision, that require that you really quickly and efficiently sample the information in front of you and you really see the world more completely, more holistically, and you don't have half of the world go by unseen.
Our vision is so critical to our daily activities that most people feel that they would be aware of any significant changes or restrictions in their vision. But the signal degrades over time so that loss occurs gradually in subtle ways.
We think if we are losing our vision, if we're going blind, we would know that. But the way our brains work, which is really cool actually, is that we have a natural blind spot that we never notice because our brain fills in all of the information that's missing in our blind spot. So we don't notice that the blind spot is there in our everyday life. So what can actually happen is you can lose your vision, but your brain continues to fill in the information for you and you don't notice those losses.
These changes sneak up on you. And in part, they're hidden from you because operationally you're still in there because you're so good at operating these abstracted levels in which you're guessing, you're predicting, you're making complex judgments based upon very lousy information. You're so good at that because you have so much experience. And the brain is a master at that. It's substantially what it's constructed to be good at.
Driving the brain to change and expand the useful field of view is not about taking in more detail. It's about attending to important details and ignoring distracting elements.
Our perception is influenced by our attention, but there are two types of attention. One type of attention is our goal-directed attention, and that's what we're going to define as top-down. That's the attention that you choose, the focus of what your goals are in your mind. Then there's the other type of attention. That's the attention that's imposed upon us, the attention that comes driven into us by the environment. So for instance, if there's a loud noise or a flash of light, or even if someone calls your name, anything that's very important or very novel will command your attention, even if it wasn't in your goals. So you constantly have this balance between your goal-directed attention, top-down, and bottom-up, which is being imposed upon you by the environment around you.
The intersection between top-down and bottom-up processing is directly tied to plasticity, influenced by the power of our focus and attention.
I'm a nature photographer, and part of what being a good nature photographer is training your bottom up to keep that sensitivity to the environment around you very vibrant. There's this photo we call reeds. Sort of looks like Asian writing. And what it really is are reeds reflected on the water. It was actually a very small part of this large, beautiful landscape that I redirected my focus to and was able to capture this picture. For me, the ability to step away from the big, overwhelming nature scene that was going on and to find a small part of the environment is really an example of this whole top-down, bottom-up. To be sensitive enough to the environment to still see this beautiful little aspect of it and capture that.
Top-down and bottom-up processing also change as we age. The ability to attend or suppress our attention intersects with our memory.
Most of our recent findings on aging is that the memory problems that we're seeing in the older adults stem from attention problems, and not classic attention problems that they're not focusing on what they want to, but the flip side of attention, that they're not ignoring what they should.
Dr. Ghazali recently compared the abilities of young adults with older adults in terms of recalling relevant visual information amid irrelevant information. Using fMRI imaging technology, he discovered that the older adults didn't fail to remember visual information. They failed to ignore unnecessary information.
So our research participants are laying inside the MRI scanner. While they lay there, we show them pictures, some of which they have to remember and some they have to ignore. So for instance, we'll show them 2 pictures of people's faces and 2 pictures of natural scenes. They'll have to remember the scenes and ignore the faces. Then we'll wait 9 seconds and show them a picture of a scene and ask if they remember it. What we find is how well they remember the scenes is directly related to how well they were ignoring the faces. However, older people have difficulty ignoring the information, and that seems to affect their ability to remember what's relevant.
Navigating sensory information is further complicated by noise. A sensory impulse in neuroscience parlance is considered a signal, the input that you are paying attention to. Noise is what gets in the way. whether through other sensory inputs distracting your attention or through degraded signals from diminished eyesight and deteriorated hearing.
Your signal is what's goal-directed, what you want to focus on, and it's surrounded by a massive amount of sensory noise. And your ability to create a very high signal-to-noise ratio is critical for all higher cognitive functions, such as memory, attention, language. And that balance seems to be affected in aging by an increase in the noise or a decrease in the ability to suppress noise.
We can't control the quality of our hearing. Our hearing can deteriorate, but what we can do in our brain is get the most out of it. We can refine and sharpen our listening at any point in life to increase the accuracy of the information that we receive from listening.
In attempting to understand the challenges that confront us as we age, neuroscientists have devised a practical model that encapsulates the pitfalls. It demonstrates signal-to-noise difficulties, while at the same time shows the problems with establishing a balance between top-down and bottom-up processing.
There's something called the cocktail party effect. So when you're at a party, you're having a conversation with someone and they're talking to you. They might not be the loudest voice in the room, right? There's a lot of other things going on, visual information, auditory information. All these things are pulling your attention away from your goals of having a conversation. So the signal is their voice, their face, their body language. And that's what you're trying to tune to. The noise is the vast majority of the information around you. So your ability to focus on your goals, that top-down directed, driven focus that's essential for you to have that conversation, is balanced by suppressing that bottom-up information, the loud noises in the rooms, the drinks being pushed together, all the other sounds in the room that are pulling you away from your focus. And that's critical. If you can't do that, you would not have a very interactive conversation. It would definitely take a hit, and you would not be able to remember it as well.
When you were young, you would pretty much remember the faces of the individuals that you're with. You could come up and associate later with the names that are associated with the faces. You'd carry that away with you in a relatively vivid memory that endures for a substantial period of time. And now that you're 60, or you're 70, or you're 80, you have less and less ability to come up with that. You just can't remember it.
Improving the quality and quantity of the information we receive through our senses strengthens our brains and improves our ability to navigate the world. One of the most powerful tools for engaging our neuroplasticity is attention. Focused, results-driven attention can literally enlarge parts of our brain. The hippocampus, a small, centrally located, seahorse-shaped part of the brain, is where we synthesize sensory information and package it into memories.
The hippocampus seems to be very central to memories in general. And the reason for that is that its connections with the whole of the cortex. It's very deep in the brain. It has connections through the cortex, right from the frontal through the parietal, down temporal regions, occipital regions. So it's got a lot of inputs.
The hippocampus is where you're hanging memories in place. You're putting them on your chalkboard, so you know what goes with what. It's the basis of reconstruction of the scene, the places in front of you, in their 2 and 3 dimensions. And it's a really good thing to continue to grow, and a really bad thing to neglect or allow to wilt.
Dr. Frakowiak and his colleagues at the Wellcome Trust Center for Neuroimaging in London became curious about the relationship of the hippocampus to visual memory. To explore this association, they had to find the right test group, and after much searching discovered that the perfect population was right outside their door.
We were talking about memory, and down the road were coming these little scooters with plexiglass fronts with a map. And these are guys who are training to get their taxicab license.
People training to be London cab drivers are said to be on the knowledge.
London Business School to the Thistle Selfridges Hotel. Off you go. I want the call.
Yeah. Okay.
Go.
I'm going to leave this on my right, Sussex Place. I'm going to go right into outer circle. Leave it by.
In fact, they're learning the whole geography of London. And then suddenly, click. My God, visuospatial memory. These guys have to remember things in space, relations in space. They have to remember routes. It appeared that we had a captured population, and we had people who were at various stages of learning about the geography of London.
Studying for the London taxicab driver license involves spending sometimes 7 days a week for 3 to 4 years, learning landmarks, street direction, and other geographical points in the complex London city area.
And at the time, we were just introducing into the lab a new technique for analyzing brain images. We were exploring the possibility that the environment could affect the structure of our brain. That depending on what we did, we could develop particular parts of our brain that were specialized for particular functions.
The hippocampus growth was related to the repeated visualizations of the mental maps that the drivers construct in their mind's eye.
I can see this map in front of me. You know, when I did the knowledge, I had a map on my wall at home for nearly 2 years, and it was like, you know, it was part of the family pictures. It was the map of London, and now I can recall that map at any time.
We made a correlation between how long you'd been in the profession and how large this part of the hippocampus was on the right side. And it was a clear relationship. The longer, the bigger.
It's always nice to know that I've got something bigger than everybody else has got.
The power of plasticity is changing our brain, driving it in either a negative or a positive direction. There's an old Spanish saying that habits are first cobwebs and then cables. Are we supporting our aging senses, or are we further entangling them? Even in extreme circumstances, when senses are lost or compromised in some way, scientists, researchers, and inventors have stepped in to give the brain additional tools to help itself. These are called sensory substitution devices, and they're founded in the roots of plasticity.
Sensory substitution devices are predicated on the idea that the brain is plastic, that even though one region of the brain came into this world wired to be visual cortex, to take signals from the eye and figure out what they mean, that another region came into this world with the destiny of being auditory cortex. Well, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. If you have ear damage and therefore no signals are arriving at the auditory cortex, if you lose your eyesight and therefore no signals are arriving at the visual cortex, well, then what can you do to restore that sense? The idea is that even if your visual cortex is not receiving signals from the eye, it's still there. It's still, waiting to be given an assignment.
Based on pioneering research by Dr. Paul Bakirita, a small group of researchers and scientists at the University of Wisconsin-Madison developed devices to take advantage of the ability of the brain to rewire itself. This technology has been an immense gift to the thousands of people affected every year by vestibular disorders or balance problems that can be caused by disease or stroke. These individuals are sometimes called wobblers.
4 years ago, I had viral meningitis and encephalitis. I was in a coma for 10 days. I almost died. And went for balance testing and found out that I had lost the vestibular system on the right side of my body. When you are disabled and you have challenges with your vestibular system, every movement is difficult. From the moment that you get up in the morning to making it into the bathroom to brush your teeth takes a tremendous amount of energy and focus.
You have a vestibular system that basically tells you the position that you're in. And if that system is not working correctly, you don't get that feedback. So when you use the brain port, it provides that information for you. Electrical signal is in the center of the array, and then once they close their eyes and they start to fall, they can feel the signal move to that side. And then they use the information that they get on their tongue to correct their balance.
The BrainPort balance device's residual effects point to the ability for the brain to rewire itself in regard to the sensory input it receives.
Initial benefit is using it while it's on. But then as they build up that residual effect, they start to stay balanced without the device. And so the goal is not to have the patient have this thing hanging around their neck all the time. It's to use it for training and then put it down.
I walked in with the cane because that's what I needed so that I could compensate for no balance on the right side. And after several days, I didn't need the cane anymore. And my youngest daughter, who was in Ecuador, had called to find out how I was, and I had told her that I no longer needed the cane, and she started crying on the phone.
This technology is also being implemented to allow the perception of visual information for the blind.
The BrainPort works by taking a visual scene from a video camera. Our cameras are currently head-mounted, and translating that into a tactile image displayed on the tongue.
The BrainPort vision device substitutes touch information in the brain with visual data.
So whatever the video camera sees as a white pixel, we present as a strong stimulation on the tongue. Whatever the camera sees as a gray pixel, we present as a medium level of stimulation. And any pixel that's black, we present as no stimulation. So you feel the shape of the objects that the video camera is seeing. And so we're painting pictures, dynamic pictures, on the tongue.
I had what they call Stickler syndrome. That weakened my retinas. They detached, they tore, they wrinkled, they disintegrated, and by the time I was 10, I was totally blind. Well, you have this little 1.5-inch square array that sits on the upper surface of your tongue, and you've got what appears to be vibrations, and the more intense vibrations are the things that you're actually looking at: lines, doors, windows, and certainly they will move in real time, the actual speed with which the object is moving, or with the actual speed with which you're approaching the object.
Very similar to the way a sighted person's visual system works. You know, our eyes get tons of information, and yet we're not overwhelmed by that amount of information. We pick and choose what we choose to attend to. And in the same way, the BrainPort, we present all the information there, and the brain in the individual figures out which details to attend to and which not to.
The BrainPort vision's ability to approximate seeing gives us another glimpse into the world of visual processing.
Only the blind subjects use visual cortex when using our device after training. And so what that shows is that it's probably the underlying information. When you're sighted, vision is so dominant that there's no reason to use visual cortex because our eyes dominate that region. But when you're blind, visual cortex gets used for many other things: audition, touch. A little bit of training, the brain figures out that the underlying information has a spatial component and a temporal component. And regardless of whether it comes from your eyes or from the tongue, this area of the brain is best suited for that type of processing.
The experience of the newfound visual information from the BrainPort vision device was revelatory to the users.
One person said they felt like a kid at a candy store. One person described it as sitting in the back seat of a car on a vacation, looking out the window and just looking out for the pure pleasure of seeing what passes by. Things that people who have sight take for granted.
Our powerful brain plasticity gives us control to maintain the skills that we have and even regain some we've lost. These skills are the key to maintaining our independence. To live our lives to the fullest under our own control is the goal of every older person. We can achieve this by following the 5 keys of independent aging. Key number 1, keep what you have. By keeping what you have, you take stock in the skills and abilities that you've taken a lifetime to master. And then you strive to keep yourself physically in a position where you can continue to learn and engage yourself in positive plastic brain change.
Impairments of vision are one of the most feared consequences of aging, because when you lose your vision, you often lose your independence, and it's rather daunting to ask ourselves, oh, what will we do if we lose our independence? And so maintaining good health is paramount to maintaining good vision.
It's clear that both diet and exercise play a big role in keeping the brain sharp as you get older.
Maintaining your physical health also means taking some simple precautions to protect your senses.
Sunglasses are very important. Most people are familiar with the effects of too much sunshine on your skin and how it may accelerate aging. I believe the same thing occurs within the eye. And we have some evidence for that. These shortwave sensitive cones had a reduction in sensitivity compared to the eye with less ultraviolet exposure. 5 years of additional exposure to ultraviolet light in this form, on average, produced the equivalent of about 30 years of normal aging.
Key number 2, be socially active.
The idea of having an impact personally and socially is extremely important to your physical health and your mental well-being. So continue to learn. Engage as many people as possible. As we age, our social networks tend to be smaller. If anything, we should fight to make them larger.
We're social creatures, and operating socially demands that we have the ability to successfully interpret what's happening with the other members of our species that are communicating with us. Life is miserable when we can no longer interpret our social circumstances that are conveyed by conversation.
Key number 3, maintain focus and attention.
Engaging yourself in situations where there is a lot of information and information that needs to be focused on, other information that needs to be ignored, pushing your cognitive abilities to the max all the time will benefit you in your everyday interactions.
I can train you to increase your field of view, but how about training yourself? How about thinking about more aggressively trying to look at the things that are beyond the things directly in front of your gaze? And how about trying to be more engaged in the environment, in the scene in front of you as a habit? How about re-engaging your vision actively, aggressively, to reconstruct your abilities, to reinvigorate and refine your abilities to take in the details of the fabulous visual world in front of you?
Key number 4, utilize the power of positive plasticity with regards to attitude and effort by being ready to learn and making the task strenuous enough to make a difference in your brain.
Your good behaviors have to be, on some level, purposeful and effortful. So when you make them purposeful and effortful, then the brain understands that you're serious, and that's what leads it to change.
Key number 5, don't accept decline as inevitable.
We shouldn't just accept visual losses or cognitive losses, but I believe that as science advances, that we will be able to intervene and avoid loss. And even, I think now, we can intervene and reverse loss.
When we start thinking about aging and decline, we should be aggressive about our aging. We should be aggressive about life to be able to seize the capacity we have to maintain that capacity. We always made jokes about having senior moments, that it's just a matter of getting older and being forgetful. What I'm hoping, and what I'm seeing to a certain extent with baby boomers, is that they are unwilling to go down without a fight. I think the biggest challenge for older adults as they age is to settle. And what I mean by to settle is that they assume that because they're older, they have to settle for less. Less sight, less hearing, less money, less social interaction. The new future of old age should really be based not just on expectations for better, but demanding better. Demanding from yourself, from your family, from companies, and from governments as to how to extend life, not simply to extend age.
As we've seen and heard, our senses play a critical role in the story of our lives and ourselves. Maintaining our senses keeps our brain more finely tuned. The quality of this information is critical because this is how our memories are built. And these memories are important in creating the reality we experience.
Our plasticity in how we perceive the world, our visual experience in our environment, exists at many levels. So it exists at the level of perception and our ability to identify or detect things around us. But it also exists in terms of our attention and our memory of our visual world.
I can reconstruct in my mind's eye the image of my grandmother. My grandmother died in 1973. I can move across her face. I can see her glasses when she wore glasses. I can see her in almost every detail. I can hear her voice in my mind, and I attach it to her. And you can do that. You can look back at her and you can say, that's my grandmother. Or you can look in at the details and you can move to the corner of her cheek or chin. You can see her hair. I can see her glasses. And we have this amazing ability to reconstruct our world in every detail like that in our minds. An important aspect of this is that place and time represent a sort of fabric upon which we hang our memories, in which we record information. And it's a fabulous aspect of our visual behavior and experience, also our listening, because basically we also attach our listening, what we heard happen in those moments, on that same fabric of place and time. And that is the basis, that's the primary basis of our reconstructing a model of our world. Our model is full of those reconstructions. Of course, the sum of these reconstructions is, guess what? Us. You know, it's us. It represents our history. It represents how we define ourselves. All of this information that we've stored on this rich fabric of place and time is the essence of what we understand, know, believe, what we are. It's the essence of what we are. It's a great personal treasure. It's our chest full of gold, right? And it's one of the great advantages of being older. We've loaded it, right? So it's so valuable if we can figure out how to sustain it.
Who we are. Maintaining that sense of who we are is what brain fitness is all about. Fine-tuning our auditory processing keeps us more aware, more able to interact socially, and more capable of capturing valuable information. Enhancing our visual processing expands our view of the world, keeps us engaged, alive, and vital. The sum of our senses come together in these full-color, widescreen memories that become our history. They form the rich tapestry of our lives. Holding on and expanding this as we age is our greatest treasure and the ultimate goal of brain fitness.